At 21 years old, Stephen Hawking received news that could have ended his future before it truly began. Doctors told him that a rare motor neuron disease would slowly take away his movement, his strength, and eventually his ability to speak. They believed he had only a short time to live. For a young man studying the universe, the diagnosis felt like the walls of his own world were closing in. His body began to weaken. His walking became difficult. His hands could no longer do what they once did. His voice began to disappear. But Hawking made a decision that changed everything. He stopped measuring his future by what his body could no longer do. He began building his life around what remained: his mind, his imagination, his curiosity, his ability to ask questions no one else could answer. As his physical world grew smaller, his thinking expanded across the universe. He studied black holes. He explored the nature of time. He wrote books that helped millions of people understand the cosmos. The limitation did not disappear. He redesigned his life around it. Stephen Hawking teaches us that limitation only becomes the enemy when we allow it to become the architect. Today, we will confront the limits we have accepted in our health, our leadership, and our financial lives. We will stop asking what has been taken from us. We will begin asking a better question: what capacity still remains, and what can we build from here? Good morning, everyone, and thank you, leaders, for joining me again today. It's Friday, the 24th, and this is the Daily Leadership Brief. I'm Jason Safford, your host and the Resilience Architect. Limitation is the final enemy of this week's leadership progression, and it often grows from repeated emotion, assumption, impression, and expectation. So, thinking back over the course of this week, I want to look at how we have progressed with our leadership and built a stronger daily operating by identifying the enemies that cause distraction and prevent us from our focus on what is the primary goal. As always, I invite you to stand, breathe, and physically prepare yourself for the challenge of one limitation that you have unconsciously accepted for today. As always, we start the day with our one-word intention. Today's word for me is expand. Find your word. We'll go over it later in the show. And your quote for today is, "I refuse to allow limitation to define my identity, reduce my contribution, or control my future." And your one daily commitment: you will redesign what you cannot remove. All right. Looking back, as we mentioned, the enemies we exposed this week: the unchecked emotion, assumption, impression, expectation, and now limitation. Every enemy narrows your capacity and takes away your ability to focus on your performance. The question for today I want you to focus on is how you separate proven facts from beliefs, and when those beliefs have been repeated so often, they now feel true. I encourage you to reflect around this idea and think about where effort, standards, and ambition have been reduced because of these enemies. And looking at identity, we see that the progression is really one in which your emotion causes a reaction. That reaction causes an assumption. That assumption causes an impression. That impression creates an expectation. And that expectation forces a limitation, which then becomes your identity. So again, looking at how our emotions can create a downhill stream, your ability to start with the unchecked emotions can change the pattern of your behavior. From that, I want you to ask yourself, what have you accepted that was never proven? Okay. Where have you stopped trying? Where have you lowered your standards? Where have you accepted poor health? Where have you accepted financial pressure? Where have you confused difficulty with impossibility? These are what become your limiting beliefs that are not proven. Again, going back to Stephen Hawking, again, at 21 years old, think about getting a diagnosis in which you were basically told that you were going to deteriorate and die. There was no hope. There was no opportunity for cure. His movement was going to disappear. His speech was going to fade. And his life expectancy was not expected to exceed, a few years. However, by concentrating on what he could do, Hawking outlasted all expectations for his diagnosis. In your own capacity to think about redesign, using Stephen Hawking as an example, we have the ability to recognize that our failures or limitations are not the ending point. They are the starting point. In Hawking's case, the moment he was told his body was going to deteriorate, he focused on strengthening his mind, his imagination, and his curiosity to explore whatever was possible while he was still alive. And that's the opportunity for us when we think about how we can redesign our own limitations. The resilience that we construct is that opportunity. Now let's think about the enemy and how the enemy can impact our life. In this case, limitation chooses smaller goals. It chooses and delays difficult conversations. It creates excuses for our existing condition and its decline. It provides, again, the lack of evidence, but the creation of fear from that lack of evidence. And finally, it turns us from a thriving entity into one of survival, and survival becomes the permanent standard. The truth is that when you are faced with a constraint, it absolutely will influence your strategy. However, that constraint should not become your identity and control your identity. I want to talk about this particular enemy in terms of how it impacts us in the physical world of our personal health. So limitation is the first thing that allows us to ignore our personal health. I don't have the time. I can't do it. I'm too busy. It's just the way it is. I'll do it later. These are all of the excuses that come from the limitation taking over how we feel. So when we look at our physical capacity and we don't address it from the standpoint of checking in with our physical self and wanting to improve it, our limitations control our overall health and condition with which to be able to perform. When we think about that in terms of an organization, whether it's your business, your family, the company you work for, the community you impact, your health becomes the primary driver of success for the organization when it comes to your impact, as well as for you to be able to achieve the goals that you set for yourself with that organization. However, the pressure that is created is one that's very visible in terms of revenue, because the more your body, your physical health starts to decline or become limited, the reality is that creates reaction in everyone else. And when revenue declines, it forces conversations. It causes discounts. People start accepting clients that are below standard, and really they start becoming sort of a chaos operation where they're just trying to accommodate anybody that will give them money. Decisions are made from the wrong place, and the measure of success becomes the focus on what is coming in rather than what is really being created and where the company's direction is really going. So when financial health of a person and financial health of a company are under attack, the reality is that the revenue becomes emotionally heavy and really compromises the overall organizational resilience of the company and the person. All right. Recognize that revenue is a not a leading indicator, but it's a lagging indicator of how you are performing overall. So when revenue is high, obviously all of your values are usually in a good place, but that can be misleading because it's a lagging indicator. So over a long period of performance, if that lagging indicator is continuing to grow, then you can check all the boxes. However, if you've got a bumpy road of revenue, or you're seeing declines and then sharp rises, these are things you have to evaluate and look at the overall organizational health of the company and the development of your leaders. When you go to the gym to strengthen yourself, you identify the equipment that you want to use, and then you start doing repetitions that become sets. And at the end of a certain number of sets, you feel like you've exhausted yourself. And that's how you get yourself stronger and feel better. However, the reality is the number of reps and sets we do is often less than our capacity and our ability to improve our capacity, because we feel tired long before we truthfully are tired. Second of all, is that our motivation is not necessarily driving our ability to perform the extra reps and sets necessary to really create stronger capacity. Again, if we don't have the coach, if we don't have the right team around us, if we don't have the right incentives, that motivation isn't necessarily going to exist. And so therefore, the opportunity to truly improve is lost in that session. What we do instead is we often do supersets where we overload ourselves thinking that that's going to achieve quick results. That is chasing. And chasing does not get you the long-term strength and ability to perform that slow, methodical repetition does, where you go to a point of true exhaustion and failure. All right. So today we have the redesign algorithm from the Win Your Day book, and this is how you approach meeting a limitation. Identify the constraint, name it, name what is actually true about the constraint. Separate fact from identity. Write down what happened is not who you are. It is an existing condition and event, but it is not your identity. Then protect your remaining capacity. Look at what still works. What are your strengths? What do you like to do? What are your opportunities? How can you perform them in a new way? Then redesign the system to accommodate that. What must change in order for you to perform your best based on this new constraint? Take one courageous action towards that new system. What can you move today to put things in the right direction and the right process? And then measure the evidence to see what improved. Work on the efficiency. How can you make things even better day by day so that the limitation looks like it no longer even exists or applies? Today, I'm also introducing the 10 daily habits of the Win Your Day book. This is a way to set your day up for success from the morning. Again, your morning installation. When you wake up, you declare your identity. You choose your one-word intention. Move your body and feed your mind. Obviously, when you feed your mind, we're talking about both what you read, listen to, as well as what you feed yourself. Your midday alignment is about completing the critical mission that you set up for the day, the most important domino that you're intending to knock down. Use Pareto's law of 80-20, where that important domino, it gets 80% of what you need done for the day done. Protect your energy. Focus on time blocks, making sure you're creating time for yourself, as well as buffers where you get a chance to breathe, reset. And then focus on creating measurable value in all of your actions, both your conversations, how you impact others, and how you receive from others. In your evening preparation, you're reviewing the day. Practice gratitude, be thankful, recognize that it is a privilege to have the breath and awareness that you have to operate each day. And then finally, with that gratitude, you can prepare for tomorrow's goals. Winning the first hour of the day is one of the most important things that you can do, and it will change your whole outlook on the day. I wake up at 4 o'clock every morning, sometimes earlier, and my focus is always on who am I becoming that I can smile back on the decision I made today. And each day, when I look at what I chose the day before, the week before, the month before, the year before, I can smile at the direction that I am going in from all of the things that I chose to do in that first hour. I set my one-word intention that provides the quality in which I will govern my actions for the day. I move, stretch, I have a morning workout, and then finally, I always take 15 minutes, which is 1% of your day, to learn something new in the morning. That creates the energy for driving your whole day forward because you took time for yourself first. In terms of the midday and evening habits, you're protecting the mission, you're focusing on completion, protection of energy, creation of measurable value, and strengthening your financial health. And finally, with each evening, you're focusing on setting yourself up for success to win tomorrow. Going back to Stephen Hawking as the model, refuse the ceiling. Whatever the constraint is that limits you, do not accept that as your identity. In Stephen Hawking's case, he could not control the physical condition that was delivered to him. However, he controlled the design of his response. This week, you learned the enemies of emotion, unchecked emotion, assumption, impression, expectation, and limitation. Next week, we begin installing the systems that prevent those enemies from returning. Here's your final declaration. I will not allow limitation to become the architect. I will protect my health. I will strengthen my capacity. I will create value. I will allow revenue to respond. I will win my day. Again, don't chase. Build your capacity to allow everything to come to you. I want to thank you again for another Daily Leadership Brief. I'm Jason Safford, and I want you to go out there, as always, and win your day.